Okay, so once we verified our balanced occlusion with our posteriors, now we're ready to place on our interior teeth. For this procedure, we can remove the incisal pin. We don't need that there. So we have a nice view and a good access to our setup. Make sure that your centric latches are always snug, not too tight, just snug enough. And the first set of teeth we're going to set up is our two centrals. Just like we did with the maxillary, we're going to do the same thing on the lower. And hopefully by the time we finish our lower interior setup, these will fit inside the space here. They'll fit inside the space. Sometimes they don't, and we might have to trim them. Hopefully we won't have to, but let's see how it goes. So I anticipate my lower interiors to be just inside my upper interiors, obviously, to accommodate our slight overjet, and a little bit tucked inside the upper incisal edges to accommodate the overbite. So somewhere around here, I need to place some wax to support the two centrals. All right, so we're going to start off by applying a little bit of wax. And we start with the centrals because we want to maintain our midline and also get an idea how much overjet and overbite we're going to implement. Now the overjet and overbite that we're going to implement all depends on the cuspal inclination of the posterior teeth that we've selected, and in this case it was 20 degree. Also depends on the amount of compensating curve that we incorporated on the upper posteriors, as well as the amount of condylar inclination. Regardless, we're going to start. I'm going to place the 3-1 to where I think is ideal. And I have my midline marked on the model here, so I have a bit of a guidance where to go with this. And as I close the articulator, I realize that I'm just too far labially and not enough overbite or vertical overlap between upper and lower incisal edges. So I'm going to take the tooth out and apply a little more wax to support the tooth and move it up a little more incisally. And again, minimize the amount of wax that you use so you have a good idea of the long axis of the tooth. Let's see how this works. Obviously there's not enough vertical overlap, so I need to add some more wax. What I'll just do here, I'll just take some of the surrounding wax, pinch it together, see if I can get this tooth to stay a little higher. Bring things together. I guess I was off. Add some more wax. Be sure not to have any wax interproximately. Otherwise, you're going to create a space between the teeth. and somewhere here. So I'm starting to get a bit of an overlap with the tooth, and looking at it from the side, it looks like I don't have enough labial inclination of the tooth. Remember, the lower center incisors do have a labial inclination. This one doesn't. So, given the fact that the incisal edge in comparison to the maxillary centrals looks pretty good, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to move the cervical third a little more towards the lingual to create that labial inclination appearance. But before I do so, before I get too far ahead of myself, I'm going to place the other central incisor next to it. Make sure that I get my midlines all in order. A little more here. And bring the articulator together to make sure our midlines are lining up. So that looks pretty good. Generally speaking, we're looking for about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters of overbite and overjet, but that's a bit of a guessing game. What's going to dictate the amount of overbite, vertical overlap, and overjet, which is the horizontal overlap, the difference between upper and lower incisal edges, is what we have on our articulator, which are our posterior teeth, our our compensating curve, and condylar inclination. So what I'm going to do next, I'm just going to let this wax cool down a bit, otherwise it's going to move around on me too much, and support the teeth a little bit more with the wax, seal it down. I'm going to move the articulator in a protrusive position so I can have incisal edge to incisal edge contact with the upper and lower centrals. And as I do so, I want to have contact between upper and lower incisal edges, and at the same time preserve the posterior contact that we had previously when we checked our protrusive. So I've loosened up my centric latches and I moved them out of the way, right? They're out of the way. I still have the elastic bands on there. And now I'm going to move the articulator protrusively. And what I'm trying to achieve here is they're end to end, and at the same time, I want to have posterior contact. So that looks pretty good. Make sure you push it all the way down. There, I can feel the posterior teeth touching together. Back in centric, back into protrusive. So edge to edge contact with incisal edges while in protrusive, as well as posterior contact. Back into centric, midlines are lining up. I do have a vertical overlap between upper and lower incisal edges, and I do have a horizontal overlap. Next tooth, I'm going to place tooth number 3-2. You can go 4-2 if you wish. But generally speaking, once more, if you're right-handed, you're most likely right eye dominant, and you want to work with the left side first to get a good idea where you're going with this. And once more, I'm going to utilize the existing teeth or surrounding teeth or adjacent teeth to position this tooth in an ideal position in relation to 3-1. I'm just going to heat up the wax a little bit more right down here at the cervical third to make sure that I don't have any cold wax there that'll prevent the tooth from moving in there. And let's see if we can get that in there. And let's see how this relates against the upper. And you can see here the plane of occlusion, it's starting to look pretty leveled when we look at it from left to right. Just lock my centric first. So the incisal edges look like they're on the same plane as the posterior teeth. And I do have that vertical overlap or overbite. How's the overjet? And when we look at it from this view, you should have the same amount of overjet that you had with the 3-1 and 4-1. It looks like it's a little bit less on that tooth, so while the wax is still warm, I'm just going to push this tooth in a little bit, and you can see the incisal edge, that little bit there. I hope you guys got a chance to see that. And that looks a whole lot better there. I think the problem that I'm going to be facing very soon is try to fit in the 3-3 in the space left over. I don't think it's going to fit. But let's try and see how close we are to this. Doesn't look like it's going to fit. The arch width is a lot more narrow at the interior portion than the mold selected. And that could be a problem a lot of times. In hindsight, maybe we could have selected a lower 1/6 interior to fit the space. But sometimes if you select one that's too narrow, you're going to have diastemas between the interior teeth or between the 4s and the 3s. So if this happens to you, what you would have to do, you'd have to take out each tooth and make it smaller, respectively, in keeping the same shape, or order a new 1/6 interior mold to fit the space. That's perhaps 2 or 3 millimeters, a little more narrow. Okay?